The security camera captures it all. 9:47 p.m., December 20th, a man's leather shoe freezes midair, aimed at his pregnant wife's belly. 300 guests watch in horror as she crashes into a 15-foot Christmas tree. Ornaments shatter like her life just did. But here's what the cameras didn't catch. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated, planned. The final move in a game she didn't know she was playing. What happened next? Her billionaire father walked through those doors dressed as Santa Claus, and revenge became a family business. If you've ever wondered how far a father will go to protect his daughter, or how a survivor turns pain into power, stay with me. This story will change how you see everything. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. And if you believe justice is ever truly served, don't forget to subscribe because stories like this need to be heard. Let's begin. The security footage freezes at exactly 9:47 p.m. on December 20th. In the frame, a man's leather shoe hovers midair, aimed at a woman in a sky blue gown. Her belly, 7 months swollen with child, catches the light from a 15-foot Christmas tree behind her. 300 guests stand frozen in the background, champagne glasses suspended, mouths open in shock. What you're about to hear happened in front of all those witnesses, 50 cameras, and went viral in under an hour. But the real story, it starts 6 months earlier, when Natalie Brennan thought she'd found love. Natalie was 28 when she met Derek Holloway at her gallery opening in Lincoln Park. She'd spent 5 years building her career as an art curator, choosing that path despite her family's wealth. Her father, Richard Brennan, owned Brennan Industries, a defense contracting empire worth $3 billion. But Natalie wanted to make her own mark on the world. Derek arrived 40 minutes late to her opening, his tailored suit drawing every eye in the room. At 35, he'd built Holloway Properties from nothing into Chicago's third-largest real estate development firm. Self-made, confident, charming in a way that felt dangerous and magnetic at once. "You're Richard Brennan's daughter," he said, not as a question but a statement. Natalie stiffened. "I'm Natalie Brennan, the curator who organized this exhibition." Derek smiled. "I stand corrected, though I have to say, some of these pieces are rather amateur. The lighting on the Rothko especially. It's all wrong." Heat flooded Natalie's cheeks. Around them, guests pretended not to listen while hanging on every word. "The lighting was carefully considered," she said quietly. "Of course, Derek's hand found her wrist, his grip firm enough to feel like ownership. "I didn't mean to embarrass you. Let me make it up to you. Dinner tomorrow." She should have recognized the pattern then. The public criticism followed by private charm. The way his fingers left small crescents in her skin when he finally released her. But Natalie was good at seeing the best in people. It was both her greatest gift and her most dangerous flaw. 6 months later, she stood in her bathroom staring at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. Her hands trembled as she called Derek. "Are you sure it's mine?" Those were his first words. The question landed like a slap. They'd been dating exclusively for half a year. She'd never so much as looked at another man. "Of course it's yours," Natalie whispered. "Well," a long pause. "I suppose we'll need to make arrangements then." Arrangements. Not celebration, not joy. Arrangements. Within a week, Derek had fired Natalie from her gallery position. He told the board she was too unstable to handle the stress. He moved her into his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, saying it was for the baby's safety. He hired a housekeeper who reported Natalie's every movement. He controlled her phone, her credit cards, her access to the outside world. "I'm doing this because I love you," Derek said whenever she protested. "The world is dangerous for pregnant women. I'm protecting you." Natalie told herself he was right. She told herself the isolation was temporary. She told herself that the way he grabbed her arm when she disagreed, leaving fingerprint bruises under her sleeves, was just stress from work. She told herself so many lies. The first time she truly understood her mistake was at Derek's company 4th of July party. They took a yacht onto Lake Michigan, 50 guests drinking champagne under fireworks. Natalie was 3 months pregnant, exhausted, and nauseated from the boat's motion. Derek spent the evening with his hand on the lower back of Vanessa Kirk, his executive vice president of marketing. Vanessa was 26, blonde, and sharp as broken glass. She wore a red dress cut down to there and smiled at Natalie with perfect venom. Must be hard keeping him interested in your condition, Vanessa said, her voice low enough that only Natalie could hear. Natalie tried to walk away. Derek caught her at the cabin door. Where do you think you're going? His voice was pleasant, but his hand on her shoulder was not. I'm tired. I want to go home. You're embarrassing me. He pushed her inside the cabin, locked the door. You'll stay here until you can behave like an adult. Natalie sat on the bed for 3 hours while the party raged above. She pressed her hands to her belly and whispered to her baby, We'll get through this. I promise. But promises made in captivity aren't the same as freedom. At 4 months pregnant, Natalie woke to wetness between her legs. In the pre-dawn darkness, she fumbled for the lamp and saw blood on the sheets. Derek. Her voice cracked. Derek, something's wrong. He rolled over, checked his phone. It's 5 a.m. I'm bleeding. You're probably fine. First pregnancies. Women bleed sometimes. He turned his back to her. I have a meeting at 7. Try to get some sleep. Natalie stumbled to the bathroom, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn on the light. More blood. Too much blood. She called 911 from the bathroom, whispering so Derek wouldn't hear. The operator stayed on the line until the paramedics arrived 20 minutes later. Derek was furious. You called an ambulance. Do you know what that's going to cost? What the press will say. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, a doctor with kind eyes examined her. The baby's heartbeat is strong. But Mrs. Holloway, I see evidence of stress-related complications. Have you experienced any trauma recently? Natalie opened her mouth, closed it. Derek stood in the corner, his presence filling the room like a threat. No, she whispered, just normal pregnancy nerves. The doctor's eyes held hers for a long moment. Then she nodded. Rest. Avoid stress. And if you need anything, we have resources. After 3 hours, Derek finally took her home. In the car, he said, Cole, you're being dramatic trying to sabotage my career with your little episodes. If you weren't pregnant, I'd have left you months ago. Natalie stared out the window at Chicago's skyline and felt something inside her crack. Not break entirely, just crack. The first fracture in her belief that love could overcome anything. That night, she did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She called her father. Richard Brennan answered on the first ring. Natalie, just hearing his voice made her throat close. They'd had a terrible fight after her mother's death 5 years ago. Richard wanted Natalie to join the family business. Natalie wanted her independence. Words were said that couldn't be unsaid. They hadn't spoken since. Dad, she started crying. I'm pregnant, and I think I made a terrible mistake. Miss, where are you? Derek's penthouse. But Dad, it's not that simple. It never is. His voice softened. But you're my daughter. Nothing changes that. Come home. I can't. Not yet. But maybe, at Christmas Derek's company is throwing a big gala. You could come. I'll be there. A pause. Natalie, if he's hurting you. He's not. The lie came automatically now. I just miss you. After she hung up, Natalie felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, fragile as spun glass. But there, the next morning, Derek was different. He brought her breakfast in bed. He apologized for being harsh at the hospital. He suggested couples therapy. I want to be better, he said, taking her hand. For you, for our son, I'm going to change. And for 6 weeks, he did, or seemed to. He was attentive, gentle, present. He took her to doctor's appointments. He talked about baby names and nursery colors. He proposed renewing their vows at the Christmas gala. Natalie let herself believe it. She wanted so desperately to believe it. At 6 months pregnant, Derek's lawyer visited. The man's name was Porter, and he had dead eyes behind expensive glasses. We need you to sign an updated prenuptial agreement, Porter said, sliding papers across the dining table. We're not married, Natalie said. Exactly, Val. This protects the child's interests, establishes a trust fund, standard procedure. Natalie read through the document. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out. In the event of separation, the father shall retain primary physical custody, and the mother waives all claims to joint property and assets. This says if I leave, I get nothing, and I lose my baby. Derek sat beside her, his hand covering hers. It's just legal protection. If you love me, if you trust me, it shouldn't matter. Unless you're planning to leave. His thumb pressed into her wrist bone. Sign it, Porter said, or Mr. Holloway will assume you entered this relationship for financial gain. Natalie looked at Derek, at the man she thought she loved, at the father of her child, at the person who held all the power. She signed. That night, alone in bed while Derek worked late, Natalie pressed her face into her pillow and sobbed. She'd just signed away her freedom, her child, her future. And she'd done it because she was too afraid to fight. This was the second breaking point, the place where her spirit didn't just crack, it shattered. But she didn't know yet that the worst was still to come. At 7 months pregnant, Natalie couldn't sleep. Her back ached constantly, and the baby's kicks kept her awake at odd hours. At 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, she wandered into Derek's home office looking for the heating pad. Derek's laptop sat open on his desk. The screen glowed in the darkness. Natalie should have walked away, should have respected his privacy. But something made her look. Maybe intuition, maybe desperation, maybe just the accumulated weight of 6 months of lies. The email tab was open. The most recent message was from Vanessa Kirk. Can't wait to see you tonight. Room 412 at the Peninsula. Wear the cologne I like. Natalie's hands shook as she scrolled. Months of emails. Hundreds of them. Plans for meetings that weren't meetings. Expenses charged to consulting that were hotel rooms and jewelry and trips to New York. And financial documents. Transfers from Holloway Properties to VK Consulting LLC. $200,000 here. $300,000 there. Over $2 million funneled to Vanessa's shell company. The affair had never stopped. Not during couples therapy. Not during the sweet words and promises. Not during any of it. Natalie heard Derek's car in the garage. She closed the laptop and fled to the bedroom, her heart hammering. When Derek came to bed an hour later, smelling of whiskey and perfume, Natalie pretended to sleep. She lay there in the dark, one hand on her belly, and felt her baby move. This child deserved better than a father who was a liar, better than a mother who was a coward. In the morning, she tried to confront him. Where were you last night? Derek was making coffee, his back to her. Working late. I told you. I saw the emails. Derek. He turned slowly. His expression didn't change. What emails? From Vanessa. The hotel rooms, the money transfers. Derek laughed. A short, sharp sound without humor. You went through my computer, violated my privacy, Natalie. This is exactly the kind of unstable behavior I'm talking about. I saw proof. You saw business correspondence. Vanessa handles several offshore accounts for the company. The hotel was a meeting with investors. Your paranoia is getting out of control. He stepped closer. It's the hormones, making you irrational. I'm not crazy. Aren't you? His voice dropped to a whisper. Who's going to believe you? A pregnant woman with no job, no money, no credibility. You signed a contract giving me custody. If you keep making accusations, I'll have you declared mentally unfit. Our son will be raised by me and someone stable. Maybe Vanessa. The threat hung in the air between them. Natalie called her father that afternoon from a coffee shop 3 blocks away. She'd walked there in the February cold, her coat not quite closing over her belly. Dad, I need help. I need to leave Derek. At the Christmas gala. Can you help me get out? Richard's voice was steel. I'll have lawyers, security, everything. Just get to the gala. I'll be there. For 3 weeks. Natalie planned. She packed a small bag and hid it in the back of her closet. She memorized Richard's emergency phone number. She told herself that on December 20th, at the Christmas gala, she would finally be free. But Derek was always one step ahead. The night before the gala, he came home with roses. I've been thinking, he said, about us, about how lucky I am. They had dinner by candlelight. Derek was charming, funny, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen in months. He talked about his childhood, his father leaving, his determination to be better. I know I've been difficult, Derek said, but I love you. I love our son. Please don't give up on us. That night, for the first time in months, Natalie believed him again. She wanted so desperately to believe that people could change, that love was real, that happy endings existed. She texted her father, false alarm, everything's fine, don't worry. Richard called immediately. Natalie, don't do this. Whatever he said to you. I was being dramatic. Dad, I'm sorry I worried you. See you tomorrow at the gala. She hung up before he could argue. Derek watched from the doorway, a small smile on his face. In his pocket, Natalie's phone was still logged into his tracking app. He'd read every message, knew every plan, and he'd just convinced her to dismantle her own escape route. I knew you'd come to your senses, Juan, he said. That night, Natalie lay awake staring at the ceiling. Her baby kicked, persistent and strong. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the fear and doubt, a small voice whispered that she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. But by then, it was too late to turn back. The Palmer House Hilton Ballroom sparkled like something out of a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across marble floors. A 15-foot Christmas tree dominated the center of the room, covered in gold ornaments and white lights. 300 guests in designer gowns and tuxedos mingled beneath arched ceilings, their laughter echoing off gilded walls. Natalie stood near the bar in a sky-blue gown that had cost Derek $8,000. The silk clung to her 7-month belly, and she felt every eye in the room tracking her movements. She was the pregnant girlfriend of Derek Holloway, Chicago's golden boy. She was supposed to smile and look grateful. Instead, she felt like a prisoner at her own execution. Derek had left her side the moment they arrived. He was across the room now, surrounded by investors, his hand resting on Vanessa Kirk's lower back. Vanessa wore red, of course, crimson silk cut low enough to be dangerous, high enough to maintain plausible deniability. Natalie's father arrived at 8 p.m. dressed as Santa Claus. It was tradition for the Brennan Industries CEO to play Santa at charity events, distributing envelopes with donation checks to various organizations. Richard wore the full costume, white beard and all, but Natalie recognized his eyes across the crowded room. He didn't approach her. Not yet. They'd agreed to keep distance until she gave a signal that she needed help. But that signal wouldn't come tonight. She'd already told him everything was fine. Natalie sipped water and watched Derek laugh at something Vanessa whispered. The woman's hand lingered on his arm, possessive and obvious. Around them, guests pretended not to notice while noticing everything. Beautiful party. A woman in emerald green appeared beside Natalie. You must be so proud. Yes, Natalie said automatically. How much longer? The woman nodded at Natalie's belly. 2 months. How wonderful. Your first, yes. The conversation was painful in its normalcy. Natalie answered questions on autopilot while watching Derek and Vanessa disappear toward the balcony. Her chest tightened. Were they really that bold leaving together at his own company party? She waited 5 minutes. 10. When they didn't return, something inside Natalie snapped. She crossed the ballroom, her heels clicking on marble. Guests parted around her pregnant form. She pushed through the balcony doors into December cold. Derek and Vanessa stood at the railing, not touching, but the space between them was charged with intimacy. They turned as Natalie approached. There you are, Derek said pleasantly. We were just discussing the Chicago expansion project. At night, on a balcony, alone. Natalie's voice was flat. Vanessa smiled. Your hormones are making you paranoid again. Don't, Natalie pointed to her. Don't talk to me about hormones. I know what this is. What is it? Derek's voice carried a warning. Tell us what you think you know. Around them, people had started to notice. Phones appeared. Cameras turned their direction. You're having an affair, Natalie said. The words felt like jumping off a cliff. You've been sleeping with her for months, maybe longer. Derek laughed. You're making a scene. I saw the emails, the bank transfers, the hotel rooms. You went through my private files. Derek's voice rose. That's illegal. That's a violation of what? Your privacy? What about my dignity? Natalie felt tears coming. What about our son? What about every promise you made? Vanessa spoke softly. He's leaving you after the baby's born. You know, he told me last night, in bed, at the Peninsula Hotel. The words were designed to destroy. They succeeded. Natalie's hand moved before her brain caught up. The slap connected with Vanessa's cheek, loud as a gunshot in the quiet night. Vanessa stumbled backward, and Derek exploded. You bitch! His face went red. You unstable, crazy bitch. He grabbed Natalie's arm, dragging her back inside. Guests scattered. Someone gasped. The music stopped. Let me go, Natalie said. You just assaulted my employee. In front of witnesses. You're done. Derek, please. His hand released her arm. For 1 second, Natalie thought it was over. Then she saw his foot pull back. Later, watching security footage, people would argue about what happened next. Some said Derek lost control. Others said it was calculated, a way to paint Natalie as the aggressor who'd provoked him. But everyone agreed on one thing: the kick was deliberate. His leather shoe connected with Natalie's hip, just above where their son floated in amniotic fluid. The force lifted her off her feet. She flew backward into the Christmas tree. Ornaments exploded like artillery fire. Gold shards rained down. The tree tilted, lights flickering. Natalie's head hit marble. The world went white. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard screams, gasps, the click of camera shutters, Derek's voice saying something that sounded like accident, and slipped. Then her father's roar. What the hell is going on here? Richard Brennan tore off his fake beard and ran toward his daughter. His Santa suit was absurd against the horror of the scene. But Natalie had never been happier to see anyone in her life. Dad, she whispered, I've got you. Don't move. The baby. Ambulance is coming. Just breathe. Derek stood over them, his face cycling through emotions. Rage, fear, calculation. He settled on concern. She attacked Vanessa, Derek said loudly. She fell into the tree. Everyone saw. Everyone saw you kick a pregnant woman, Richard snarled. You just ended your career, son. Sirens wailed in the distance. Natalie closed her eyes and felt blood trickling down her temple. Her dress was wet. She couldn't tell if it was champagne from shattered glasses or something worse. Her baby kicked. Once, twice, then stopped. Dad, Natalie whispered. I can't feel him moving. Richard's hand found hers. Hold on, just hold on. The last thing Natalie saw before the paramedics arrived was Derek's face. He wasn't looking at her with love or regret. He was looking at his phone, already calling his lawyer. In that moment, Natalie understood. She wasn't a person to Derek, she was a problem to be managed. And problems like her didn't survive people like him unless someone fought back. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and cold white light. Richard rode with Natalie, still wearing his Santa suit minus the beard. His hand never left hers. Stay awake, he kept saying. Natalie, stay with me. She wanted to tell him as she was trying, but the words wouldn't come. Her head throbbed where it had hit marble. Her hips screamed where Derek's shoe had connected. And worst of all, deep in her belly, there was silence where there should have been movement. At Northwestern Memorial Hospital, nurses swarmed. Someone cut away her $8,000 gown. Someone else hooked her to monitors. A doctor appeared, her face professional and calm. I'm Dr. Patricia Mills, the woman said. We're going to check on your baby. Try to stay calm. They pressed an ultrasound wand to Natalie's belly. The room went quiet. Natalie stared at the ceiling and counted her heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then, through the speakers, another heartbeat joined hers. Faster, weaker. But their baby's alive, Dr. Mills said. Heartbeat is unstable but present. We need to monitor closely. Natalie started crying. She couldn't help it. Relief and terror mixed together until she couldn't tell the difference between them. Richard squeezed her hand. He's strong, like his mother. An hour later, they moved Natalie to a private room. Richard made phone calls while nurses checked her vitals. Through the window, Natalie could see news vans gathering in the parking lot. The video had already gone viral. Derek arrived at midnight with 3 lawyers. Porter, the dead-eyed attorney who'd forced the prenup, led the group. Behind him were 2 women in sharp suits carrying briefcases. Mr. Holloway has rights as the father, Porter announced. He needs to be consulted on all medical decisions. Richard stood. At 62, he was shorter than Derek but broader, with the presence of someone who'd built empires. Get out of my daughter's room. Mr. Brennan, this is a legal matter. I said get out. Derek spoke for the first time. His face was composed, apologetic. Natalie, honey, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. Everyone saw you attack Vanessa. You lost your balance. I tried to catch you. Natalie stared at him, at the man she'd loved, the man who'd kicked her in front of 300 witnesses and was now lying about it to her face. Get out, she said quietly. We need to discuss custody arrangements. Given your mental state, get out. Dr. Mills appeared in the doorway. Everyone out except family. Now, the lawyers tried to argue. The doctor pointed at the door. I can have security remove you. Your choice. After they left, Dr. Mills sat beside Natalie's bed. I need to examine you more thoroughly. Your father can stay or wait outside. He can stay. The examination was painful. Dr. Mills was gentle but thorough. When she finished, her expression was grave. Natalie, I'm seeing evidence of old injuries. Bruising around your ribs and arms that's healed in stages. This isn't the first time you've been hurt. I fall a lot, Natalie said automatically. I'm a doctor. I know what abuse looks like. Mills glanced at Richard. I'm obligated to report suspected domestic violence, but I'm also obligated to give you resources. There are shelters, legal advocates, people who can help. He has lawyers, Natalie whispered. I have nothing. He made me sign a contract. If I leave, I lose everything, including my baby. No contract overrides federal law, Mills said, especially one signed under duress. Richard spoke. I'll hire the best lawyers in Illinois, the best in the country. Whatever you need. He'll fight back. He'll destroy me. Let him try. After Dr. Mills left, Natalie told her father everything. The isolation, the control, the affair, the prenup. Every degrading moment she'd hidden for months. Richard listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, Why didn't you call me sooner? Pride, shame, fear. Natalie wiped her eyes. I thought I could handle it alone. I thought he'd change. Men like Derek don't change. They just get better at hiding what they are. That night, Natalie couldn't sleep. Nurses came every hour to check the baby's heartbeat. Each time, she held her breath until she heard that fast, determined rhythm. Her son was fighting. The least she could do was fight too. At 3 a.m., someone knocked softly on her door. Natalie expected a nurse. Instead, Vanessa Kirk stepped inside. The woman still wore her red dress, but it was wrinkled now. Her makeup was smudged. She looked smaller, somehow. Human. What do you want? Natalie's hand moved toward the call button. To tell you the truth, Vanessa's voice was different, quieter. Derek set you up tonight. He knew you'd found the emails. He planned the whole thing, got me to provoke you, made sure there were cameras. He wanted you to look unstable. Why are you telling me this? Because he's doing the same thing to me. Vanessa sat in the chair Richard had vacated. He promised to leave you after the baby came. Promised to marry me. But tonight, after you left in the ambulance, he told me that I was fired. Said I was a liability. Good. I have proof. Vanessa pulled out her phone. Video of him planning it. Audio of him coaching witnesses. Financial records showing he embezzled from his own company and framed me. I kept copies of everything because I'm not stupid. I knew eventually he'd turn on me, too. Natalie studied the woman who'd been sleeping with her partner, who'd taunted her at parties, who'd helped destroy her life. Why would I trust you? You shouldn't, but you should use me. Vanessa's eyes were hard. Derek Holloway thinks he's untouchable. Let's prove him wrong. After Vanessa left, Natalie sat in darkness, listening to her baby's heartbeat on the monitor. For months, she'd felt powerless, trapped, broken. But maybe broken things could still be dangerous. Maybe it was time to stop being a victim and start being a survivor. The next 24 hours were a blur of phone calls and legal consultations. Richard hired Gloria Steinfeld, a high-powered attorney who'd successfully prosecuted 3 domestic violence cases that made national headlines. Gloria was 65, sharp as a knife, and took no prisoners. Here's what we're dealing with, Gloria said, sitting across from Natalie in the hospital room. Derek's team filed for emergency custody, claiming you're mentally unstable and a danger to the child. They have 50 witnesses ready to testify you attacked Vanessa unprovoked. That's not what happened, Natalie said. I know, but in court, it's not about truth. It's about evidence. Gloria opened her briefcase. Fortunately, Vanessa Kirk came to see me this morning. She's agreed to cooperate fully. Richard paced by the window. Can we trust her? She's motivated by revenge and self-preservation. That's actually more reliable than altruism. Gloria pulled out a tablet. She gave us security footage Derek thought was deleted. Watch. The video showed Derek and Vanessa on the balcony an hour before the party. Derek's voice was clear. When she confronts you about the affair, provoke her. Make her angry. If she hits you, I'll have grounds for the custody suit. Make sure the cameras see it. Vanessa's voice. What if she doesn't hit me? She will. I've been pushing her for weeks. She's right on the edge. Natalie felt sick. The whole night had been theater, a trap she'd walked into willingly. Gloria continued. We also have financial records showing Derek embezzled $2 million from Holloway Properties and tried to frame Vanessa. And medical records going back 6 months showing your injuries. Will it be enough? To fight the custody suit? Yes. To put him in prison? Gloria smiled thinly. That depends on how brave you're willing to be. The press conference was Richard's idea. He wanted it done immediately, while public sympathy was still fresh. Gloria argued for waiting, building a stronger case. But Natalie made the decision. I'm doing it now. While I'm still angry. They held the conference in a hospital meeting room. 50 reporters crowded inside, cameras everywhere. Natalie sat at a table, her father on one side, Gloria on the other. She'd changed into simple clothes, put her hair in a ponytail, and wore minimal makeup. She wanted people to see her as she was. The room went silent when she started speaking. My name is Natalie Brennan. 10 months ago, I fell in love with Derek Holloway. I thought I'd found a partner. Instead, I found an abuser. She detailed everything. The isolation, the control, the affair, the prenup signed under duress. She showed photos of bruises on her arms. She played audio of Derek's voice from Vanessa's recordings. Last night, Derek Holloway kicked me in front of 300 witnesses because I dared to question him. He kicked me while I was pregnant with his child, and then he tried to convince everyone it was my fault. Natalie paused, letting cameras capture her face. No tears, just steady, cold fury. I stayed silent for months because I was ashamed, because I thought I deserved it, because I believed the lie that love meant endurance. But my son deserves better than a father who's a monster, and I deserve better than being a victim. She pulled up her sleeves, showing the bracelet of bruises around both wrists, old ones, yellow-green, newer ones, purple-black. This is what love looked like in Derek Holloway's world. This is what he calls protection. This is what he tried to hide with expensive clothes and pretty words. The questions came fast after that. Natalie answered every one. Yes, she was pressing charges. Yes, she would fight for custody. Yes, she believed Derek should be in prison. As they were leaving, a reporter called out, "Do you forgive him?" Natalie stopped, turned. No, and I don't think I ever will. Forgiveness is for people who are sorry. Derek is only sorry he got caught. The press conference went viral within an hour. Major networks picked it up. Social media exploded. The hashtag Justice for Natalie trended worldwide. Public opinion, which had been mixed, shifted dramatically. Derek's investors began pulling out. His corporate partners released statements distancing themselves. By evening, Holloway Properties stock had dropped 40%. Derek released his own statement through Porter. It claimed Natalie was lying for money, that she'd always been unstable, that this was a gold digger's revenge. Nobody believed him. The FBI arrived at Derek's office on Christmas Eve. They had warrants for financial records, computers, phones. Vanessa had given them enough evidence of embezzlement to justify a full investigation. Derek was arrested on his way out of the building. The perp walk was captured by 24 cameras. He looked smaller in handcuffs, less powerful, almost human. But Natalie knew better. Men like Derek didn't surrender easily. This was just the beginning. That night, in her hospital room, Natalie felt her son kick for the first time since the attack. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered, "We survived. Now we fight." Outside her window, Chicago sparkled with Christmas lights. The city looked peaceful from this height, beautiful even. But Natalie knew that beauty could hide terrible things. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. Now it was time to teach Derek the same truth. The legal proceedings stretched across 3 months. Natalie was released from the hospital after 5 days, with orders for bed rest and close monitoring. Her son, miraculously, was unharmed. Dr. Mills called him a fighter. He takes after his mother, Richard said. Natalie moved back to her father's estate in Lake Forest. The house was too big, too quiet, but safe. Richard hired private security and nurses. He cleared his schedule to be present for every doctor's appointment, every legal meeting, every moment Natalie needed him. I should have been there sooner, he said one night over dinner. I pushed you away. I should have pushed back. The relationship was still healing, still fragile, but it was something. Derek's trial began in March. The courthouse in downtown Chicago was surrounded by protesters. Half carried signs supporting Natalie. The other half, smaller but louder, claimed Derek was being railroaded by a vindictive ex. Gloria Steinfeld led the prosecution. Derek's legal team was expensive and aggressive, led by Marcus Vaughn, a defense attorney famous for getting wealthy men acquitted of everything from fraud to murder. The trial was televised. America watched every moment. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They showed security footage from the Christmas gala, played audio recordings of Derek planning the confrontation, presented financial documents proving embezzlement, called witnesses who testified to Derek's pattern of control and abuse. Dr. Mills testified about Natalie's injuries. These bruises were weeks old, months old. This wasn't one incident. It was sustained abuse. Richard testified about the prenup. My daughter signed under duress while pregnant and vulnerable. It's unconscionable. Vanessa Kirk was the star witness. She spent 2 days on the stand, detailing the affair, the embezzlement, and Derek's manipulation. She cried when describing how he'd used her. I thought I was special, Vanessa said. I thought he loved me, but I was just another tool, another thing he could use and discard. The defense tried to paint her as a scorned mistress seeking revenge, but Gloria was ready. Miss Kirk, why did you keep evidence against Derek? Because I knew eventually he'd do to me what he did to Natalie. Men like Derek Holloway don't change. They just find new victims. When it was Derek's turn to testify, Marcus Vaughn coached him through a performance. Derek was contrite, emotional, apologetic. I loved Natalie, Derek said, his voice breaking. I made mistakes. I had an affair. I lied. But I never meant to hurt her. That night at the gala, everything happened so fast. She attacked Vanessa. I tried to stop her. It was an accident. Gloria's cross-examination was surgical. Mr. Holloway, you claim it was an accident, but we have audio of you planning the confrontation. Video of you deliberately kicking Miss Brennan. Witnesses who saw you aim for her pregnant belly. Which part was accidental? Derek's composure cracked. She was ruining my life. Everything I built. By existing, by being pregnant with your child. By being weak. The courtroom went silent. Even Marcus Vaughn looked shocked. Gloria pressed. Weak how? She couldn't handle pressure. Couldn't be what I needed. I gave her everything, and Derek stopped, realizing his mistake. You gave her bruises, Gloria said quietly. You gave her fear. You gave her trauma. And when she finally stood up to you, you tried to destroy her. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman was a middle-aged black woman with kind eyes. She looked at Derek as she read the verdict. On the charge of felony assault, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. On charges of witness tampering, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Each word another nail in Derek's coffin. The sentencing came a week later. Derek stood in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled, and listened to Natalie give her victim impact statement. She stood at the podium holding her 3-week-old son. Henry, the baby slept against her shoulder, tiny and perfect. Derek had never asked to see him, never asked his name. Natalie's voice was steady. You didn't break me, Derek. You broke yourself. My son will never know your name. He'll never know your voice. He'll grow up safe and loved and free from your poison. That's my revenge. Not prison, not public humiliation, just knowing that you'll never touch us again. The judge, a stern woman in her 70s, handed down the sentence. 18 years, 12 for fraud, 6 for assault, no parole eligibility for 10 years. Derek's face went blank. Then he turned to Natalie and mouthed two words, "I'm sorry." But it was too late for apologies. Natalie walked out of the courthouse with her father on one side and her son on the other. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed, but all she felt was exhausted. "Is it over?" she asked Richard. "The legal part is the healing that takes longer." He was right. Justice wasn't closure. It was just the beginning of learning to live again. 6 months after the trial, Natalie stood in an empty storefront in Lincoln Park. Sunlight streamed through tall windows. The space smelled of fresh paint and possibility. "What do you think?" Richard asked. "It's perfect." They were opening a new art gallery, not Natalie's old one, which Derek had destroyed. Something new, something hers. Henry babbled from his stroller, waving chubby fists. At 8 months old, he was healthy and happy. He had Natalie's dark hair and eyes that were entirely his own. Sometimes Natalie looked at him and saw Derek in the shape of his nose or the set of his jaw. But mostly she just saw Henry, her son. Her miracle. The gallery would feature work by survivors of domestic violence, art therapy pieces, paintings and sculptures born from pain and transformed into beauty. Natalie had spent months curating, reaching out to artists, building something meaningful. "Your mother would be proud," Richard said. The mention of her mother still hurt. 5 years after her death, the grief was softer but present. Natalie wished she could tell her about Henry, about surviving Derek, about finding herself again. "I think she'd be relieved I finally stopped being stubborn and asked for help." Richard laughed. "That's the Brennan curse. We're all terrible at asking for help." The gallery opening was scheduled for October. Natalie spent the summer preparing, hiring staff, arranging pieces. It was exhausting and exhilarating. For the first time in years, she felt like herself. Vanessa Kirk remained part of Natalie's life in an unexpected way. After testifying, Vanessa entered therapy and got sober. She'd started a blog about recovering from toxic relationships. She and Natalie weren't friends exactly, but they understood each other. "We were both victims," Vanessa said during one of their awkward coffee meetings. "I just didn't realize it until he threw me away too." "Do you regret it?" "The affair. Every day. But regret doesn't change the past. It just teaches you to make better choices in the future." Natalie's own therapy was ongoing. Twice a week, she sat in a comfortable office and talked about fear, trust, and trauma. Her therapist, Dr. Rachel Foster, was patient and insightful. "PTSD doesn't disappear," Dr. Foster explained. "You learn to manage it, to recognize triggers, to give yourself grace on bad days." Bad days happened often. Sometimes Natalie heard Derek's voice in crowds. Sometimes she flinched when men moved too quickly. Sometimes she woke gasping from nightmares where she was still trapped in that penthouse. But there were good days too. Days when Henry laughed, when the gallery came together, when she had dinner with her father and felt the warmth of family, when she looked in the mirror and recognized the woman staring back. In September, a letter arrived from Derek, forwarded through lawyers, vetted for threats. Natalie almost threw it away. But curiosity won. The letter was 5 pages long, handwritten, meandering. Derek talked about prison, about therapy, about regret. He claimed to be a changed man. He asked if she'd bring Henry for a visit. Natalie read it once. Then she burned it in the fireplace. "He wants forgiveness," she told Dr. Foster in their next session. "Do you want to give it?" "No. Maybe that makes me bitter. Maybe I'm supposed to be bigger than that. But I'm not. He tried to destroy me. I won't give him the satisfaction of pretending it didn't matter." "Forgiveness is optional," Dr. Foster said. "Healing isn't. You can heal without forgiving him." The gallery opened on October 15th. 200 people attended. Press coverage was extensive. The art was powerful and raw and beautiful. Women stood in front of paintings and cried out. Men read descriptions and looked ashamed. Everyone left changed. Natalie gave a short speech at the opening. "This gallery exists because I survived something I didn't think I would, because I found my voice when I thought it was gone forever, because I learned that trauma doesn't have to define you. It can transform you, if you let it." She didn't mention Derek by name. He'd taken enough of her story. This part belonged only to her. Henry fell asleep in Richard's arms during the speech. Natalie watched her father sway gently, humming under his breath, and felt her chest tighten with love. They'd both made mistakes, both hurt each other, but they'd found their way back. That night, after everyone left, Natalie walked through the empty gallery. Her footsteps echoed on polished wood floors. Art glowed under carefully placed lights. Everything was perfect. She stopped in front of a painting she'd done herself. It showed a woman standing in a shattered doorway, light pouring in from behind. The woman's face was turned away, but her shoulders were straight. She was walking toward the light. Natalie touched the frame and whispered, "We made it." Behind her, Henry stirred in his stroller. She scooped him up, pressed her face to his soft hair, and breathed in the smell of innocence. The future was uncertain, full of healing to do, scars that might never fade, questions Henry would ask someday about his father. But right now, in this moment, they were safe. They were free. They were home. And that was enough. The knock on the gallery door came at closing time on a Tuesday evening. Natalie was in the back office reviewing applications for the foundation's latest grant cycle. Henry's Hope Foundation had grown beyond her wildest expectations, funding art therapy programs in 3 states. "We're closed," she called out. The knocking continued. Persistent. Natalie sighed, set down her laptop, and walked to the front. Through the glass door, she saw a woman in her 30s, thin and nervous. Natalie opened the door. "Can I help you by? Are you Natalie Brennan?" And yes. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "I saw your TED Talk about surviving abuse, about finding your voice. I needed to tell you that you saved my life." This happens sometimes. Women appeared at the gallery or the foundation. They shared their stories. They cried. They thanked Natalie for speaking up. It never got easier. Each story was a mirror reflecting her own pain. "Do you want to come in?" Natalie asked. They sat in the gallery cafe. The woman, whose name was Jennifer, talked for an hour about her abusive marriage, about finally leaving, about the fear that followed her everywhere. "How did you stop being afraid?" Jennifer asked. Natalie considered the question. "I didn't. I'm still afraid sometimes, but I learned that fear is just information. It tells you to be careful. It doesn't have to control you." After Jennifer left, Natalie locked up and drove to her father's house for dinner. She'd bought her own place a year ago, a townhouse in Lincoln Park. But Tuesday dinners with Richard were sacred. Henry, now 2.5, ran to his grandfather the moment they arrived. "Papa, I drawed you a picture." Richard swept him up. "Did you now? Let's see this masterpiece." Over dinner, Richard asked about the foundation. Natalie updated him on the new shelter opening in Milwaukee, the art therapy expansion, the documentary they were producing about domestic violence survivors. "You've built something remarkable," Richard said. "We built it," Natalie corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." After Henry fell asleep on the couch, Richard poured 2 glasses of wine. They sat in his study, comfortable in the quiet. "I got a call from Derek's lawyer today," Richard said. Natalie's hand tightened on her glass. "What did he want?" "Derek's up for parole review next year. He wanted to know if you'd write a letter supporting early release." "Absolutely not." "That's what I told him." They sat in silence. Derek was a ghost that occasionally rattled chains. Mostly way, Natalie didn't think about him, but sometimes late at night she wondered if he'd changed, if prison had taught him anything, if he felt genuine remorse. "Do you ever regret it?" Richard asked. The public trial, the media attention. It couldn't have been easy. "Every day," Natalie admitted. "But I don't regret speaking up. That saved me. Maybe saved others." The statistics supported her. Domestic violence reports had increased 20% in Chicago since her case. The Henry's Hope Foundation hotline received hundreds of calls monthly. Her story had started conversations, changed laws, saved lives. But statistics didn't capture the therapy, the nightmares, the relationships she couldn't maintain because trust was still impossible. The dates that ended when she flinched at sudden movements. "Are you happy?" Richard asked. Natalie thought about it. Happiness felt too simple, too clean. What she felt was more complex, satisfied, purposeful, at peace with her scars. "I'm alive," she said. "I'm raising my son. I'm doing work that matters. That's more than I thought I'd have 2 years ago. Richard raised his glass. To being alive. They toasted through the window. Chicago's skyline glittered against darkness. The city where everything fell apart, where everything came back together. Natalie's phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. The woman had become an unlikely friend. She was sober now, engaged to a woman who made her laugh, working as an advocate for corporate whistleblowers. The text read, "Coffee tomorrow, I have news." Natalie smiled. Whatever Vanessa's news was, it would probably be dramatic. Everything about Vanessa was dramatic. But she was genuine now. Real. They'd both been burned by Derek. Both learned to rise from ashes. At home that night, Natalie tucked Henry into bed. He was getting so big, already insisting on picking his own clothes, telling elaborate stories, asking impossible questions. "Mama, why don't I have a daddy?" The question she'd been dreading. Natalie sat on the edge of his bed. "You have a biological father," she said carefully. "But he's not part of our lives. Sometimes families look different. But you have me, and Papa Richard, and lots of people who love you. Is he a bad man?" Children were perceptive, too perceptive. "He made bad choices," Natalie said, "but you don't have to worry about him. You're safe." "Okay," Henry yawned. "Can we get a doll just like that?" The moment passed. Children were resilient like that. Natalie hoped that resilience would protect him as he grew, that he'd never inherit his father's capacity for cruelty. She kissed his forehead. "We'll talk about the dog." In her own room, Natalie stood at the window. Her reflection stared back, overlapping with the city lights beyond. She looked older than 28, tired, but strong. Her phone chimed with a notification. The evening news. She usually avoided it, but something made her click. The headline read, "Derek Holloway denied early parole consideration." Natalie read the article. A judge had reviewed Derek's case and determined he hadn't shown sufficient rehabilitation. He'd serve at least another 3 years before the next review. She should have felt satisfaction, victory. Instead, she just felt tired. Derek would always be part of her story, but he didn't get to be the ending. Natalie put her phone away and climbed into bed. Tomorrow there would be more work, more women to help, more stories to tell, more healing to do. But tonight she was just a mother who'd survived, a woman who'd found her voice, a survivor who'd built a life from rubble. And that was enough. That had always been enough. The courtroom was smaller this time, less press, less spectacle, just Natalie, Gloria Steinfeld, and Derek across the table with his parole attorney. It was Derek's second parole hearing. 3 years had passed since the first denial. He was eligible for release with good behavior. His lawyer argued he was rehabilitated, reformed, ready to rejoin society. The parole board had requested victim impact statements. Natalie could have submitted hers in writing, but she wanted Derek to hear her voice one more time. She stood at the podium, notes in hand. Derek looked older. Prison had aged him. Gray streaked his hair, lines marked his face. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "5 years ago," Natalie began, "Derek Holloway kicked me while I was pregnant with his son, in front of 300 witnesses. He did it because I dared to question him, because I existed outside his control." She paused, letting the words settle. "Since then, I've rebuilt my life. I run an art gallery. I started a foundation that helps domestic violence survivors. I'm raising my son to be kind, empathetic, and gentle. Everything his father isn't." Derek flinched. "Derek's lawyer will tell you he's changed. That prison reformed him. Maybe that's true. I don't know. And I don't care, because rehabilitation isn't about what he's become. It's about what he destroyed." Natalie pulled out a photo. Henry at age 5, smiling at his kindergarten graduation. "This is your son. You've never met him. Never asked about him. Never paid $1 in child support. He doesn't know your name, and he never will." She set the photo face down. "I'm not here to ask for mercy. I'm here to remind this board that Derek Holloway is dangerous. Not because he's violent, though he is, but because he's convincing. He makes people believe his lies. He manipulates. He controls. He destroys." Gloria had advised keeping the statement short, focused. But Natalie had more to say. "I forgave myself for believing him, for staying too long, for signing that prenup. But I'll never forgive him for making me doubt my worth. for teaching me that love meant fear, for almost killing our child. The parole board members took notes. Their faces were neutral, professional. Derek will tell you he's sorry. He'll cry. He'll perform remorse beautifully. But ask yourself this: if he hadn't been caught, would he have stopped? If that video hadn't gone viral, would he be here claiming rehabilitation? Natalie looked at Derek directly for the first time. You didn't change because you wanted to be better. You changed because you had no choice. That's not redemption. That's survival. She gathered her notes. I don't believe Derek Holloway should be released. But if you decide otherwise, I hope you're right about him. Because if you're wrong, someone else will pay the price I paid. Someone else will spend years rebuilding what he destroys in moments. Natalie sat down. Derek's parole attorney stood immediately. Ms. Brennan's statement is emotional, understandably. But my client has completed extensive therapy. He's participated in domestic violence intervention programs. He's expressed genuine remorse. May I speak? Derek's voice was quiet. His attorney looked surprised. They'd clearly prepared a script. Derek was deviating. The parole board chair nodded. You may address the board. Derek stood. He looked at Natalie. Not at the board, at her. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. I don't expect you to believe I've changed. But I need you to know that I remember what I did. Every day. I see your face. I hear the sound of you hitting the floor. I know what I am. His voice cracked. Natalie's therapist had warned her this might happen. That Derek might seem genuine, that she might feel something. She felt nothing. I was a monster, Derek continued. I justified it, told myself you provoked me, that I was the victim, but I was wrong. About everything. Tears rolled down his face. Performance or genuine? Natalie couldn't tell anymore. Didn't care. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Derek said. I'm just asking for a chance to spend whatever time I have left trying to be better than what I was. I'll never know my son. I'll never make this right. But maybe I can prevent someone else from becoming what I was. He sat down. The room was silent. The parole board deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, the chair read their decision. After careful consideration, we have decided to grant parole with conditions. Mr. Holloway will be released in 90 days. He will serve 3 years probation. He will continue therapy. He will have no contact with Ms. Brennan or her son. He will surrender his passport. Any violation results in immediate reincarceration. Natalie felt Gloria's hand on her shoulder. She'd expected this. Statistics showed that white-collar criminals rarely served full sentences, but knowing and experiencing were different. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Natalie gave a brief statement. I respect the parole board's decision. Derek Holloway will be monitored closely. If he violates any conditions, he'll return to prison. I've moved on with my life. I suggest he do the same. That evening, Natalie sat in her gallery after closing. The space was quiet, peaceful. Art glowed under soft lights. 5 years of work surrounded her. Henry was at Richard's house for the night. Natalie had the rare gift of solitude. She poured a glass of wine and walked through the gallery, stopping at each piece. Here was a sculpture by a woman who'd escaped a trafficking ring. Here was a painting by a teenager whose father had beaten her. Here was photography by a man who'd survived childhood abuse. Every piece was a story of survival, of transformation, of refusing to let trauma have the last word. Natalie's phone rang. Vanessa. I saw the news, Vanessa said. Are you okay? I'm fine. Expected it, really. Want company? Actually, Vanessa arrived 20 minutes later with takeout Thai food. They ate in the gallery cafe, talking about everything except Derek. Vanessa's wedding planning, Henry's upcoming 6th birthday, the foundation's expansion into Texas. You know what's wild, Vanessa said. 5 years ago, I hated you. I thought you were weak, boring, in my way. 5 years ago, I hated you too, Natalie admitted. I thought you were evil. A home wrecker. Everything wrong with the world. And now I think we were both victims of the same con artist. And we both survived. They clinked glasses. Later, alone again, Natalie locked up and drove home. The Chicago streets were familiar now, comfortable. This city had seen her lowest moment, but it had also seen her rise. At home, she checked her security system, a habit from the early days that never quite left. Everything was secure. She was safe. In bed, Natalie opened her laptop. She'd been writing a memoir, working on it slowly over the past year. Her editor wanted it finished by fall. The book would be called After the Fall: One Woman's Journey from Victim to Survivor. She read the last chapter she'd written. It ended with the trial verdict. But that wasn't the real ending. Natalie started typing. People ask if I've forgiven Derek Holloway. The answer is no. Maybe that makes me vindictive. Maybe I'm supposed to be bigger than that. But forgiveness isn't mandatory for healing. I've healed by building a life so full of purpose and love that Derek's ghost can't haunt it. She paused, considering her next words. Derek will be released from prison soon. He'll try to rebuild his life. Maybe he's genuinely changed. Maybe prison taught him empathy. I hope so. Not for his sake, but for whoever encounters him next. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. But my story isn't about Derek anymore. It's about Henry, about the gallery, about the thousands of women who've called our hotline or walked through our shelter doors. It's about the art on these walls and the voices that refuse to be silenced. Natalie looked at the framed photo on her desk. Henry at 5, missing his front teeth, grinning at the camera. He was growing up strong, confident, loved. I survived because I spoke up. I healed because I built something meaningful from my pain. I won because I refused to let Derek Holloway write my ending. She typed the final paragraph. Justice is imperfect. My scars remain. Some nights I still dream of that Christmas gala, the sound of ornaments shattering, the cold marble against my back. But when I wake, Henry is safe in the next room. My father is a phone call away. My work continues. That's not the fairy tale ending people want. There's no perfect closure, no moment where everything is magically okay. There's just the choice to keep living, to keep building, to keep believing that surviving isn't enough. You have to transform. Natalie saved the document, closed her laptop. Tomorrow she'd write more, but tonight she'd done enough. She turned off the lights and lay in darkness, listening to the city outside her window. Sirens, traffic, life continuing its eternal rhythm. In 90 days, Derek Holloway would walk free. He'd rebuild his life. Maybe he'd be better. Maybe he'd be the same. But Natalie Brennan was already free, had been for years. And that was the real victory. Not that he was punished, but that she was liberated. Not that he lost, but that she won. Not revenge, but survival. And survival, she'd learned, was its own form of grace. Natalie closed her eyes and, for the first time in 5 years, she slept without dreaming of Derek at all. She dreamed instead of her gallery, of art blooming on white walls, of voices rising together, of survivors becoming warriors, of pain transforming into purpose. She dreamed of Henry growing up safe, of a future written in her own hand, of a story that was finally, truly, completely hers. And that was enough. That had always been enough. That would always be enough.